everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to speckle on some Knit Picks Hawthorn yarn using Kool-Aid. I used this Kool-Aid already to dye some gorgeous roving. You can check out that video. It'll be linked down below. But now with the rest, I want to dye some of this Knit Picks Hawthorn, which is 80% superwash fine Highland wool, 20% polyamide. Now I have pre-soaked all of this yarn in some water with a 1/4 cup of white vinegar for about 20 minutes. What do you need to dye yarn with food coloring anyway? You need a protein-based yarn, so wool is perfect. Superwash is really great because colors will strike quickly. You need the artificial food coloring, which we have in the Kool-Aid. You need acid, which today we have two forms, the vinegar in our pre-soak, but also the citric acid powder that is in the Kool-Aid packets. Finally, you need heat, which we will get from the stovetop. Now, I am personally comfortable using my cooking pots and pans to dye yarn with Kool-Aid. However, because I'm set up with my dedicated dye equipment, and that's what I'm going to use today, all of the tools and equipment I happen to be using are dedicated for dyeing yarn. If I'm going to be using one item that is dedicated for dyeing yarn, especially at the beginning of the dyeing process, then I make sure all of the tools I use are dedicated for dyeing yarn and are not used for the preparation of food. So these are the same tools and equipment that I use with commercial acid dyes. If you go and check out my playlist of all kinds of different Kool-Aid dyeing videos, you'll see that I frequently use my cooking pots and pans for these projects. It's just today, this is what I have out, and so therefore this is what I'm using. Today we are going to dye two different colorways, and I am just working in this catering steam pan as a protected work surface, but you can use, I use a shower curtain on the countertop a lot and things like that. Gloves are entirely optional. The one note though is if you're dealing with a powder, you want your gloves to be, you don't want them damp like this because you don't want the Kool-Aid to stick to the gloves. We want it to be able to sprinkle it onto the yarn. Now I have the yarn really nice and spread out here, and starting with our blue raspberry lemonade, I'm gonna come in and very lightly, think like maybe you're adding salt to a dish. Add this on, and you can barely see it. I will zoom in a moment so you can get a nicer look, but we are going for very, very lightly speckled. It may not be the most even, but we will do a heavier speckled one later. Let me zoom in. You see how you can barely see the speckles? I'm coming in with some of our lemon lime. And one of the reasons why the speckles do not show up right away is that these colors are not super deep overall. And if you look at the powder looks very white. So you have to wait for the powders to sort of land on the yarn and then for it to sink in. And it's possible the green might be fairly pastel. The blue seems to be a little deeper. I feel like from far back you can see like a hint of green. I'm actually going to wipe my gloves off on a damp paper towel before we flip this over to add more color. And the reason why is that if I had Kool-Aid still on my fingertips before we flipped it, then we would end up with a larger splotch of color, which can be very nice, but that's not what we're going for here. And so I am now going to continue lightly speckling, very, very light. It's a little hard because you can't see where it's landing. Now, with Kool-Aid, the most pigmented flavor is cherry. So if you want the deepest colored speckles, that is the color I would go with. And the palest color is lemonade. And so that's the one where it would be the hardest to see anything. Now, which of course you can't entirely see, but as I am going around, and I've got the green now, I am moving my fingers together slowly, letting just a few granules at a time come out. Later on, I will go heavier, and it'll be something that you'll be able to see better from where you are, but this is truly light and barely there. As in, I can barely see it. And yes, that blue is doing a better job giving some pigmented specks than the green. But I do promise, both are here. You can barely see it. Now you can see it. You can see those blue specks really easily. The green ones, not so much. I am going for restraint with this first colorway. On the next one, we're gonna use up all this powder that we have left. So I'm now gonna take this barely there colorway, go pop it in a steamer basket on my stovetop for at least 20 minutes. And I'll show what the steamer basket looks like once we do the second colorway, but I am just going to carefully pick this up and go pop it in the basket. In both of these cases, I squeezed out most of the liquid from the yarn, but what I didn't do is remove and rinse out the pan in between the first and second one. This time we're going for larger patches of color, and I don't mind as much if I end up touching it and we have splotches. We are gonna go heavier this time, and you should be able to see it just fine. So once again, starting with dry gloves, and what I think is the blue, this time I'm coming in, and you might be able to see that right away. I'm adding bigger, almost polka dot sections. I'm taking a pinch, and I'm depositing that pinch all in one area. Now, when you knit this up, this will end up resulting in random patches of color that only last a small, like on a small space, but it'll be a little more visible than what we have on the other one. But I think that these two colorways could fade together really nicely. Goodness. See, even now you can see the color in here a lot better. I feel like in a lot of my videos I am hyper focused on getting super fine speckles, and sometimes I might forget that it is okay to have larger color pops on your yarn. There's nothing wrong with that. That isn't incorrect in any kind of way. So I'm actually rather enjoying this, and now I don't know if I'm even going to use up all this Kool-Aid. I mentioned in another video recently that there have been times when I think I have used as many as 20 packets of Kool-Aid on 100 grams of yarn, and today so far I have used these 2 packets on 300 grams total. So it is worth keeping in mind that you are not required to use it all up. You could save your Kool-Aid for later, but if you do want a really pigmented color, for all this looks bright right now, it will be less bright once it dries, but it's still a super fun, random colorway. And goodness, maybe I'm gonna need to pre-soak a third and go a lot heavier, because I am actually really enjoying the sporadicness. I still will want to dye the other side of this, so I'm gonna go ahead and just give it a minute or two, go set a third skein into pre-soak, and then we'll come back and flip this. The benefit of doing only 100 grams of yarn at a time is that I am able to spread things out a fair amount, but you do want to pay attention, especially around the ties. Now, as I am spreading out the fiber, I am trying to take care to not press and rub. We want to expose areas that where we want to add more color, but I'm not trying to blend it. And some white is perfectly okay. Maybe for the third color, I will just go a little more wild and use up the rest of the color. And I probably have more Kool-Aid packets, so if I feel like that there's not enough there, then that's fine. But the nice thing about dropping so much powder on is that even without touching it, it does have the ability to go through some layers just because of the separation between the strands of the yarn that we see here. But I am trying to just randomly spread out this color. But I am paying a little bit of attention for where the fiber like sort of twists and moves to try to just randomly, where do we need a little more blue? I feel like the last skein we do will be fairly similar to this one, just because there isn't that much color left, but we'll still have some fun. So I am going to be waiting 13 minutes because that's how much time is left on the timer, and when that timer goes off, I'll start steam setting this. Just to show off my steamer basket, it's a stainless steel multi-pot, and I have the yarn just in here. There is definitely space in here for me to fit 300 grams of yarn, but to avoid waste, I'm not using plastic wrap today. So if I were to wrap them up in plastic wrap and I already had a skein in here setting, I would be okay bringing another one in because they couldn't touch each other. But since I was going for barely their color on this one, with more color on this next one, if I were to put it straight in, then we could have some color transfer. So anyway, I will be back shortly. All right, it has been 20 minutes, and so I am going to remove this yarn. There is some color, it's just barely there. A lot of times I'll do 20 to 30 minutes. It's not that big a deal how long you do it. And now I am coming in with our heavier speckly, but actually it's still pretty light, all things considered. It's just compared to the last one. Whew, it looks pigmented. All right, and we're gonna let this go for 20 to 30 minutes. With this final skein, I am going to try to use up all of the color. I am not sure if there's enough color for me to do what I did before, only heavier, but we'll see. We will see. Maybe what I'll do instead of those splotches, maybe for comparison's sake, can't tell which color is which, I am going to lightly go all over. And so then we can compare these three techniques. So instead of lightly letting the color fall, I am going to town, but all over. So rather than putting it in small areas, I am spreading it all over the place. There's still going to be a lot of white, and there's some patches where it's going to be heavier. I'm trying to save some for the other side, but overall, we're just spreading it out. And so you can definitely see there's some areas where it is more clumped and less clumped. So this one will probably have as much, if not more, pigment as the second one that we did, but the color might not look as bright. It depends really on how much total we add. So I'm now going to just wipe off my fingers, and then we will flip. I'm not going to worry about things rubbing, but we are going to try to spread as much as we can so we can get good coverage. Again, we do want our fingers to be dry. I am almost done with the blue. It's funny, the green definitely seems to spread out more. Paying extra attention around the tie. But the blue does give us some sharper individual speckles, which is not always what I am used to. Okay. I transferred it to my hand so I can more easily sprinkle it on. And we could move the yarn around more, but I am trying to not overthink it, and we are just having fun. And now, sort of evenly disperse it. There is a lot more of the green. I wonder if the blue just has less particles with pigment on it overall. But it's hard to know. It's really fun doing this so exuberantly. If this were acid dyes, well, I suppose there's some pastel colors where it wouldn't really be as, make as much of a difference. But if this were acid dyes, very, very likely we would, if it were acid dyes, there would probably be a lot more pigment overall. Now, just like with last time, I do want to let this sit until the steamer basket is free. And because we were so exuberant, being in a walled pan will keep a lot of it here, but we will want to go ahead and make sure that we wipe down our work surface really well. But here is a nice look at the fiber, which because of the shadow, I'm not sure how well it's showing up, but it's really pretty. Again, if you want to know how much yarn you can dye with one packet of Kool-Aid, the answer is it really depends. If you want something super pigmented, you're gonna want multiple packets per 100 grams. But if you want something that is in the more medium pastel range and you don't mind some of that white showing through, then really you can have one packet stretch over multiple skeins. It all depends on the final look that you're going for. Anyway, I am really excited to see all three of these dry because while the overall technique is very similar, we were applying dry Kool-Aid powder on the countertop, followed by steam setting, but the way and the heaviness and the, like, we went all over versus in small discrete spots, those will lead to different types of colorways that are all beautiful in their own right. All right, skein 2 is done. And again, they are, I mean, even in the steam, you can see the difference between those two. And now our final contender, which, ooh, I see some yellow. I think that the lemon line maybe broke, which is awesome. Again, 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, our last one is done. And now we just need everything to cool completely so we can wash it. Let's wash this Kool-Aid colored yarn. And looking at the colors there, I promise there is color in this one. It is just super subtle, super subtle. Right here I have some plain tap water that is cool, and I'm gonna pop all of the yarn in. Since I know that Kool-Aid and food coloring strikes well to this yarn base, even though there's different amounts of pigmentation in these three skeins, I can wash them all at once, which is not something that I would necessarily do if I was worried about color bleeding. But I know that this color is going to be in the yarn. There's not very much color in here at all. I'm going to add a little bit of some clear dish soap to here. As I mentioned, there are some things we want to rinse out of our yarn that includes that flavor. So it's a little more than if we just did straight food coloring. If you are using a drink mix that has sugar, thankfully sugar is super soluble, so you will need to rinse that out as well. But there is no bleeding visible here, which, I mean, we expected. And so the colors overall are fairly muted. They are not super intense, they are fairly pastel. But I think that, and so they will probably look even more pastel once the yarn is dry. Things always seem to be more intense when they are wet. But I think that this is really, really fun. So anyway, I'm gonna go rinse out the soap, put the yarn through my spin dryer to help remove the excess water, and then I'm gonna hang it up to dry so we can come back and look at the finished yarn. There's both a reasonable amount of color here, but also not that much color at all. To be fair, we did use only 2 packets of Kool-Aid and 2 medium amounts of pigmentation in those flavors. So there wasn't that much color. Oh, and it wasn't even 2 whole packets because I did some roving with the exact same 2 packets as well. But I don't think I've tried Countertop Speckles with green Kool-Aid before. And maybe not blue on the counter either. The first colorway I did has possibly some of the most restraint I have ever done. The blue actually does have impact in some places. You can see it from far away. The green is much softer. You can see it in areas, but even where it did technically speckle, it is so pastel that it's not entirely registering very much. I'm not sure if I've ever done a colorway with this little pigment, but I would say that this as a white with some bare hints of color would be a really fun thing to fade into either or both of the other 2 skeins. Because it's not a pure white, there will still be some tonal nature and some specks in there. Next up, we went a bit heavier, and so instead of trying to do the lightest speckles that we could, I strategically placed patches of the color to give us more defined spots. And in this case, the green does show up a lot more because in each of those areas we had more powder. I think that while I love the idea of like a tiny pinpoint speckle, when you're knitting, like some of these specks aren't even a whole stitch. So a yarn like this will still look extremely speckled in a finished garment. Finally, we went all over with both of the colors on this last skein of yarn. And the results are really, really interesting to me. I think we absolutely have some breaking in the green. Now, granted, we have blue speckles. That came from the Blue Raspberry Lemonade. But I see patches of yellow and patches that are more green. Whatever is in that green Kool-Aid, I think did split with more yellow and then more green. In none of the circumstances do we see sort of sharp pigmented green speckles. Even though if you look closely, you can say, okay, I see some little hints of yellow and green in here. It isn't as like sharp as what we see with the blue, which is honestly really, really surprising to me. The reason why this is so surprising is that of all of the colors that I play with in food coloring wise, blue number 1 takes the longest to strike. It needs a little more heat, a little more acid. So getting those sharp colors with the blue is a bit surprising. With the green though, it being so soft and in some places seeing green and some more yellow, yellow does go faster, but getting to break blue and yellow can be difficult. It's hard to say for sure or to give a firm hypothesis of what is causing the yellow versus green, because with the blue layered on there, you can't really separate the blue from the blue raspberry lemonade to blue specks that may have been present in this green packet of Kool-Aid. So clearly I need another green packet of Kool-Aid and we need to do more speckling. That's the only way we can create a firm conclusion. If you would like to see that video, please leave a comment below and give this video a thumbs up while you're at it. I'm not sure if I actually recommend using 2 packets of Kool-Aid on so much yarn, but if you like pastels and still want to play with a little bit of variation and pop, then this might be the right thing for you. Now, I sometimes have people ask about the longevity of food coloring, and I do have a video where I show some of my projects where I have seen fading. But in general, with food coloring, it is probably less light fast than, say, commercial dyes. But if you don't store it in direct sunlight, then it can last for years and years. I mean, there's absolutely no question there's color in all 3. And I'm very happy that I did the restraint of these 2 instead of going straight for this, which is probably where I most often would end up with leftover Kool-Aid. And I am especially happy with how doing speckling but using thicker patches of dye, so there's a little bit more impact, so that way that speck will be maybe a stitch or half a stitch versus just a speck within a stitch, I think is really, really fun, and I want to play around with that more. It's funny, I feel like with my speckling journey, I started big and I was like, those speckles are too big, I want to get small. And now that I know that I can achieve really small, I want to go bigger again. It's all an evolution and a journey, and thank you so much for being part of it. If you would like to continue to join me on my journey of exploring color and yarn, please make sure you're subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and press that bell icon to turn on notifications so you never miss when I post new content. I do have an Etsy shop where most of my yarn from these videos ends up. I also have Patreon. There's tons of links down in the description of ways and places where you can find me on social media and help support the content here on the channel. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.